I'm a research professor in the higher education sector, where we appoint people to powerful positions on the basis of merit. When I graduated many years ago, the room was filled with people from around the world, different races, different colours, different religions, as many women as men. But now, many years later, 30 years later, I often find that I'm the only woman in a room full of old white men. When I ask my peers, where's all the diversity gone? They shrug their shoulders and say, we appoint on merit. Actually, we don't appoint on merit. We appoint on metrics as a proxy for merit. We need to rethink how we measure merit. And we need to consider demerit as part of that calculation. So when we think about revolutionising, challenging, and changing the higher education norms, the accepted norms in the higher education workplace, things like an obsessive focus on a very narrow set of metrics that are used as a proxy for merit, the high attrition of women, the lack of diversity in our leadership, and sometimes the development of a toxic and unwelcoming environment for the workplace. We need to rethink merit and how we measure it, and we need to make demerit part of that calculation, because obviously we don't want to appoint people to positions of power, influence, decision-making that might, for example, be sexist, racist, homophobic, or bullies. So what do we mean by merit? The dictionary definition says it's the quality of being particularly good or worthy, especially so as to deserve praise or reward. So far, so good. I think we'd all agree that we should appoint on merit when that's what it means. And in our diverse society that's multicultural, with 50% women and 50% men, we would expect that merit and the power and influence earned as a consequence should be spread evenly across society. But it's not. When we look at the people with power, leadership and decision-making, they're narrowly concentrated in one demographic, old white men. Now let me state for the record that I have nothing against old white men. My dear old dad, who passed away last year, was an old white man for most of the time that I knew him. My 4 brothers that I love dearly are now all old white men. And my husband, the love of my life, was an old white man when we married. But would I want a group consisting of my dad, my brothers and my husband making all the decisions that impact on me? No way. On the other hand, old white men have been making decisions for others for millennia. So why should we change that? And anyway, if those old white men have been appointed on the basis of merit, doesn't that mean that everybody else simply isn't meritorious? Why should we change? Hillary Clinton says that if we're to solve the world's problems, we need diversity in our leadership, different thinking, different life experiences. She says it's not just the right thing to do to have diverse leadership, it's the smart thing to do. But Hillary's a woman, so maybe she's got a conflict of interest in saying that. What's the data tell us? Well, there's considerable evidence that shows diversity in leadership teams, different life experiences bring increased outcomes, increased profits. Diversity in leadership teams gives us a competitive advantage. And if we look just at gender as one aspect of diversity, companies led by women almost exclusively earn more profits than companies led by men. What else is the case for women of merit in academia? Working groups consisting of women and men produce higher quality science than groups with a single gender. If you measure the team collective intelligence, the single most important factor to increase the team collective intelligence is having more women on the team. And if you make an organisation better for women, it makes it better for everyone by increasing access to parental leave, work-life balance, and flexible work practices. Now, universities have had they pride themselves on being knowledge-driven, meritocratic institutions that develop policy and best practice based on the data. And since the 1980s, we've had more women than men undergraduates in universities. Women have won more than their fair share of university medals and postgraduate prizes. So we would expect that after those decades that have gone through, those women of merit would have passed through the ranks and now be leaders, now be professors in universities. What do the data tell us? This graph shows us the representation of students and staff at universities in Australia in the natural and physical sciences in 2011. There were nearly 60% women at undergraduate level, but at each stage there's an attrition of women till we get to professor level E. And there we have less than 20% of professors are women. This has been called a scissor graph because of the shape. It's been called the silent brain drain, and it's been called the stupid curve because of the wastage of talent at senior levels. What this graph and every other piece of data that shows that we're reducing diversity as we go to senior positions is that we're doing something wrong. All the data tells us that having diversity is better for productivity. It's good for business. But the attrition of diversity impacts negatively on productivity and innovation. Now, why this happens is a complex problem. There are many contributing factors to the loss of diversity as we go from undergraduate to professor. But I want to go back to what I said at the beginning. When we question the lack of diversity at leadership, the response is, well, we appoint on merit. We can't change that. I want to focus on two aspects of that. The disconnect between real merit and what we actually measure, the metrics, and the fact that we don't consider demerit in that calculation. So how do we measure and assess universities and professors? Well, here are some of the metrics we use. The ratio between the teachers and students, the ratio between international to domestic staff and students, the number of research papers published, the number of grants awarded, the number of PhD students completed. Well, you know, these are reasonable metrics, I suppose, but they're very narrow. They don't measure anywhere near the sorts of things that universities do or professors do in their everyday life. And it's no coincidence that these things are very easy to measure. So it's easy to say that's what merit is. But is that really merit? The problem with saying that those narrow and easily measured metrics are merit are as follows. We have now developed within the sector ever more cryptic and obscure metrics to measure our performance. Things that nobody outside the sector knows what they mean. H-index, impact factor. Yet they are avidly pursued within the sector. And the higher those numbers are, the more you're valued. The more your status is, the higher you move. But are they really merit? What are they not measuring? I think if you ask most people what merit is and what you would like to see in the people promoted to the upper levels are these sorts of things: compassion, integrity, humility, respect, as well as critical thinking and creativity. But we don't measure those. Most of them we don't measure at all, and some of them we only measure indirectly. So let me give you an example of the disconnect between merit and metrics. If you're a professor and you want to take on some PhD students and you think it's really important that you give them your time to help develop their research skills, help develop their confidence, help develop their career path beyond PhD, you might think that it's unethical to take on more than 3 PhD students at once because you don't have time to give them those things. But if you only take on 3 PhD students at once, and the next person beside you takes on 10 PhD students, well, they win on the metric, on the PhD metric. And that means they win on the merit. You lose. And it means your university loses as well. It means your university doesn't value you as highly because you're not taking on 10 PhD students. We need to change that. I think that's wrong. We need new and better metrics for merit that value these important personal qualities and enable different models of success from what we've worked on in the past. We shouldn't be assessing institutions on how many PhD students they produce. We should measure institutions on how well they support those PhD students. We should measure how inclusive the universities are, how diverse their leadership is, and how much work-life balance their staff have. Because after all, international rankings are meant to identify the best workplaces, the best places to do research, the best places to study for staff and students. Those things should be taken into account. So here's the metrics I think we should be using. To measure universities better, we need a happiness index. Bhutan measures its gross national happiness of its people. It doesn't measure gross domestic product. It wants to know whether its population, whether the psychological well-being, they measure the diversity, they measure things like health and well-being. We can use that survey. We can survey the staff and students at universities and add in, of course, a few other things to measure happiness in academia, like, for example, how fairly the teaching load is allocated, how service is recognised, the number of high-quality coffee shops on campus, and what else? And the amount of annual leave that staff take. Then there's the fairness index to address the gender pay gap. This is to make sure that people who do the same job, who are appointed at the same level, get paid at the same amount. The diversity index, study after study, shows that diversity is good for productivity, it's good for business. So the leadership of universities should be diverse, and we should measure that as a metric. And we should be supporting people at universities who have family commitments. We should be making sure that there are enough childminding places, childcare places on campus, that there are parenting rooms on campus. We should be measuring how much parental leave is being taken by men. And we should be measuring the percentage of meetings that are held outside core hours so that those with parenting responsibilities can't actually attend. And what about how we measure a professor? In addition to those traditional research metrics, we should be measuring other things like sponsorship, how well a professor supports the career of junior colleagues instead of competing and stamping out junior colleagues, how respected and trusted and liked a professor is by his or her team members, the civic mindedness tally that recognises all the things that we're not measured for at the moment and that are not valued, our community outreach, our peer review, our conference organisation. We should add that up and measure it. But these are all the things on the plus side, the merit. What about demerit? Demerit is defined as a fault or disadvantage, a mark awarded against someone for a fault or offence. I think we need to measure demerit too. I think that whenever a professor tells a sexist, racist or homophobic joke, that should count as demerit. And I think every time the university holds a conference or supports a conference or panel where all the speakers are old white men, that should count as demerit. Merit versus demerit. Unfortunately, the metrics we have at the moment can lead to unprofessional, sometimes unethical behaviour that may be tolerated, even rewarded, because that person has huge metrics. A survey of scientists on field trips recently found that 64% of those respondents reported sexual harassment, 22% sexual assault. Most of those reporting were young women, undergraduates, postgraduates, postdoctoral researchers. 5 of them were high school students. Most of them were female, and most of the perpetrators were senior professors. That power differential makes it very difficult to report because that professor may be very well regarded in their field and may have huge metrics, so they're very valued by their university. It means the victim is confused, silenced, shamed, often leaves, because merit at the moment outranks demerit. I think we need to measure demerit, and we need to subtract that from the points for merit to really evaluate the overall merit of universities and individuals. And we have the technology. I think we could develop an app, a demerit app, so that when a young female researcher finds that a professor seated in the tea room with a couple of his chums is discussing every woman who enters the tea room and concluding aloud whether or not she's wearing a G-string, the female researcher can get out that app, pull down the professor's name, put the thumbs down beside it, and select objectification of women, so that when he returns to his office, he'll be locked out for an hour. He won't have access to his phone or his laptop for an hour. And if more than one person that enters that tea room uses the app, he'll be locked out for a lot longer, and a message will be sent to his supervisor who will need to take action, or they will get demerit points too. We will add up those demerit points for each individual and for each institution and subtract them from the overall metrics for merit. We are now in the 15th year of a new millennia, yet we are stuck in the stereotypes of the past. We need to rewrite the rules, challenge, disrupt, and revolutionise the workplace, define merit much more broadly than we do at the moment, develop new metrics to measure important personal qualities that are hard to measure, and value ethical behaviour as well as traditional achievements. We need to make sure we're not appointing people that have demerit, and we need to bequeath new models of success and leadership to the next generation. In this revolutionised workplace, the people invested with power, leadership, and decision-making will be people who are or have compassion, integrity, humility, respect, as well as critical thinking and creativity, so that we can make sure that everybody in society has the opportunity to succeed and proceed. Those people will be valued most highly, their merit will be highest, and they will be valued by their universities. Thank you very much.